New Year's Eve at Manhattan's most exclusive restaurant. Rachel Carter, billionaire CEO, three-time Fortune cover feature, stood at the host stand and heard words she never expected. No tables available. She could buy the building. She couldn't buy a seat. As Rachel turned toward the door, past families laughing over champagne and children counting down to midnight, a man and his young daughter suddenly stood. He looked directly at her and waved. Why would such a small gesture change everything about this night? Rachel Carter had walked into boardrooms where billionaires went silent. She had stared down investors twice her age and made them blink first. But standing at the host stand of Le Monde Enchanté on New Year's Eve, she felt something unfamiliar crawling up her spine. Powerlessness. The host was young, polished, professionally apologetic. He smiled the way people smiled when they delivered bad news to someone they assumed could handle it. Rachel did not feel like handling it. She had left her assistant at home. No driver waiting outside. No reservation made weeks in advance because she never imagined needing one. Tonight was supposed to be different. Tonight she had wanted to be just a woman having dinner. Alone, but by choice. The restaurant glowed like a jewelry box. Crystal chandeliers scattered light across white tablecloths. Families filled every table. Children in velvet dresses. Couples leaning close over wine. Laughter rolled through the space in waves, comfortable and easy, like people who belonged to each other. Rachel stood at the edge of it all, holding her coat, feeling the weight of eyes that didn't recognize her. She had been on the cover of Fortune 3 times. Here, she was just someone without a reservation. The host gestured vaguely toward the bar. He suggested she could wait, though he made it clear nothing would open up. His tone was kind, but firm. Rachel understood tone. She had used it herself 1,000 times. This was the tone of a door closing. She thought about offering money. She could triple the price of a table. She could buy the entire night for someone else and take their spot. The words formed in her throat, but didn't come out. Buying her way in would only confirm what she already felt, that she didn't belong here. Not tonight. Rachel turned toward the exit. She moved slowly, her heels clicking against marble, and every step felt like a small defeat. Around her, the restaurant pulsed with warmth she couldn't touch. A father poured sparkling cider for his son. A grandmother wiped frosting from a toddler's cheek. A couple raised their glasses and clinked them together, soft and certain. Rachel had built an empire. She had shaped markets and launched products and changed industries. But she couldn't buy her way into this. She couldn't negotiate herself a family. She reached for the door handle. Cold air slipped through the gap, sharp against her skin. Outside, the city glittered with a kind of mocking brightness. Everywhere, people were celebrating. Everywhere, people had someone. Rachel tightened her grip on her coat. She would go home. She would pour herself scotch and sit by the window and watch the fireworks alone, the way she had done for the past 4 years. It was fine. She had chosen this life. She had traded closeness for control, and control had made her unstoppable, untouchable. Then she heard it. A small voice, clear and curious, cutting through the noise. A child's voice. Rachel looked back without meaning to. Near the center of the dining room, a little girl was standing on her chair, one hand gripping the edge of the table. She was maybe 6 or 7, with dark curls pinned back with a glittery clip. She was staring directly at Rachel, not with recognition, not with pity, just with the kind of open attention children gave to things that confused them. The girl tugged on the sleeve of the man sitting beside her. He was tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a simple button-down that looked carefully ironed. He had the kind of face that carried weight quietly. Tired eyes, strong hands. He glanced at his daughter, then followed her gaze across the room to where Rachel stood frozen in the doorway. The girl said something Rachel couldn't hear. The man leaned down, listening. His expression shifted. Surprise, maybe? Or hesitation. He looked at Rachel again, longer this time, and something passed across his face that she couldn't name. Then he straightened. He glanced at the empty chair across from him. He looked back at Rachel. And then, slowly, he raised one hand and waved. It wasn't a grand gesture. It wasn't confident. His hand lifted, hesitant, almost awkward, and stayed there for only a second before dropping back to the table. But it was unmistakable. An invitation. Rachel stood completely still. She didn't understand what was happening. People didn't invite her to things. People asked her for things. People wanted her approval, her investment, her time. But no one just waved her over to share a table on New Year's Eve. The little girl was smiling now, bouncing slightly on her chair. She waved too, both hands in the air, as if Rachel were someone she'd been waiting for. The man said something to her, gentle and low, and the girl sat back down but kept watching. Rachel felt every eye in the room shift toward her. The host had noticed. A waiter slowed near the kitchen door. A woman at the next table leaned toward her husband and whispered. Rachel's instinct was to leave, to walk out with her dignity intact and pretend this moment had never happened. Accepting help from strangers meant admitting she needed it. It meant sitting at a table where she wasn't in control, where she didn't set the terms, where she would be, for the first time in years, just a guest. But her hand had already released the door. Her feet had already turned. She walked back through the restaurant, past the tables full of families, past the host, who looked faintly surprised, past the hum of conversation that seemed to pause and then resume around her. She reached the table where the man and the little girl waited. Up close, she could see the girl's dress was slightly wrinkled, like it had been packed in a suitcase. The man's tie was crooked. There were 2 plates on the table, half finished, a glass of water, a pink lemonade with a straw. The man stood when she arrived. He didn't offer his hand. He just gestured to the chair across from him and said, in a voice that was careful and kind, that they had an extra seat if she wanted it. Rachel looked at him. She looked at the girl, who was grinning like this was the best idea anyone had ever had. She looked at the empty chair. And then, for the first time in a long time, Rachel Carter made a choice that had nothing to do with strategy. She sat down. The girl introduced herself immediately. Her name was Sophia. She was 7 3/4, and she liked unicorns and science and mac and cheese in that order. She talked the way children talked when they weren't performing for adults, fast and honest and without filter. She asked Rachel if she liked the restaurant, if she was here alone, if she had any kids. Rachel answered quietly, unsure how to match the girl's ease. No kids. Yes, alone. The restaurant was beautiful. The man finally spoke. His name was Carlos Brooks. He didn't explain why he had waved her over. He didn't apologize for the intrusion or make a joke to smooth the strangeness. He just said it was nice to meet her and asked if she'd eaten yet. Rachel said she hadn't. Carlos flagged down a waiter without hesitation, as if inviting a stranger to join them on New Year's Eve was the most natural thing in the world. Rachel sat with her hands folded in her lap, her coat draped over the back of the chair. She felt awkward, exposed, like she had walked into someone else's life and didn't know the script. But Sophia kept talking, kept asking questions, kept pulling Rachel into the moment with a kind of fearless curiosity that left no room for retreat. And Carlos, quiet and steady across the table, didn't try to fill the silence. He just let it sit. Let her sit. Let the night unfold however it needed to. For the first time in years, Rachel Carter was not in control, and somehow that didn't feel like losing. The waiter arrived with a menu, and Rachel accepted it without looking at the prices. Old habit. She scanned the descriptions, aware that Sophia was watching her with the kind of attention that made adults self-conscious. The girl had propped her chin on both hands and was staring openly, as if Rachel were a puzzle she was trying to solve. Carlos glanced at his daughter, then at Rachel, and something like apology flickered across his face. Sophia broke the silence first. She asked Rachel what her favorite color was. The question was so unexpected that Rachel almost laughed. She said blue. Sophia nodded seriously, as if this confirmed something important, and announced that her own favorite was purple. Not pink, because everyone always assumed pink. Purple like the sky right before it got dark. Rachel found herself nodding back, matching the girl's seriousness, and realized she couldn't remember the last time someone had asked her anything that wasn't about money or strategy or market projections. Carlos ordered for Sophia without needing to ask what she wanted. Chicken tenders and fries. Plain, no sauce. He ordered a steak for himself, medium rare, and a side salad. When the waiter turned to Rachel, she hesitated. She usually ordered whatever seemed appropriate for the setting. Tonight she didn't know what that was. She asked for the salmon and handed back the menu before she could second-guess herself. The waiter disappeared, and the silence returned. But it felt different now, less fragile. Sophia asked if Rachel liked animals. Rachel said she did, though she didn't have any pets. Sophia said she wanted a dog, but their apartment didn't allow them. She described in great detail the kind of dog she would get if she could. A golden retriever, or maybe a husky, or actually maybe one of those small, fluffy ones that looked like a cloud. Carlos listened with the patience of someone who had heard this list many times before. He didn't interrupt. He just let his daughter talk. And Rachel noticed the way he watched her, the way his whole body seemed to soften when Sophia smiled. Rachel asked Sophia what she wanted to be when she grew up. Sophia said a scientist, or a baker, or maybe both. She could invent new kinds of cake, she explained, like one that tasted like strawberries but was actually made of spinach, so it would be healthy. Rachel said that sounded like a good idea. Sophia beamed. Carlos caught Rachel's eye across the table, and for a second, something like understanding passed between them. A shared recognition that this girl was extraordinary, and they were both just trying to keep up. The food arrived, and the conversation shifted into the easy rhythm of eating. Sophia talked between bites, asking questions that had no agenda. Did Rachel like roller coasters? Had she ever been to the ocean? What was her favorite kind of pizza? Rachel answered each one, surprised by how much she had forgotten about herself. She liked roller coasters, but hadn't been on one in 20 years. She had been to the ocean once as a child, in North Carolina, and remembered the sand being too hot to walk on. Her favorite pizza was plain cheese, which Sophia declared was the only correct answer. Carlos spoke less, but when he did, his voice carried a steadiness that Rachel found oddly comforting. He didn't try to impress her. He didn't ask what she did for a living, or where she lived, or any of the questions people usually asked when they were trying to place her in their mental hierarchy. He just existed across the table, present and unhurried, and let the evening unfold at its own pace. Sophia finished her chicken tenders and announced that she needed to use the bathroom. Carlos stood immediately, but Sophia shook her head and said she could go by herself. She was 7 3/4, she reminded him, which was old enough. Carlos hesitated, then glanced toward the restrooms near the back of the restaurant. He told Sophia to come right back, and she rolled her eyes in the way children did when their parents worried too much. She slid off her chair and walked away, glittery clip bobbing with each step. The table fell quiet. Rachel looked down at her salmon, aware suddenly of how little she and Carlos had spoken directly to each other. He was cutting his steak with careful precision, and she wondered if he felt as awkward as she did. She searched for something to say, something that wouldn't sound like small talk or prying. She asked how long he and Sophia had lived in the city. Carlos looked up, slightly surprised, and said about 3 years. They had moved from Boston after his wife passed away. He said it simply, without drama, the way people stated facts they had lived with long enough to carry without breaking. Rachel felt the air shift. She didn't know what to say. Condolences felt insufficient. Silence felt wrong. She settled on saying she was sorry. And Carlos nodded, accepting it the way he probably accepted all expressions of sympathy, with quiet grace and no expectation of more. He explained that his wife had been sick for a long time. Sophia had been 4 when she died, old enough to remember her, but young enough that the memories were starting to blur. Carlos said it had been hard at first, figuring out how to be both parents, how to braid hair and pack lunches and show up to school events when all he wanted to do was disappear into his grief. But Sophia had needed him, and that need had pulled him forward, one day at a time, until the days became years, and the weight became something he knew how to carry. Rachel listened without interrupting. She didn't offer advice or try to relate his experience to anything in her own life. She just listened. And Carlos seemed to appreciate that. He said Sophia was the reason he got out of bed most mornings, the reason he kept going. She made everything make sense in a way nothing else did. Rachel thought about her own mornings. The alarm at 5, the coffee she drank standing by the window, the emails she answered before the sun came up. She had built her entire life around making things make sense, but she had never needed another person to do it. Carlos asked gently if Rachel had family in the city. It was the first personal question he had asked, and Rachel felt her defenses rise instinctively. She could deflect. She could give a vague answer and steer the conversation back to safer ground. But something about the way he asked, without judgment or expectation, made her want to answer honestly. She said no. Her parents had passed away years ago. She had a brother in Seattle, but they didn't talk much. Work had taken up most of her life, and by the time she looked up, she realized she had built an empire, but forgotten to build anything else. The words came out more raw than she intended. Carlos didn't rush to fill the silence. He just nodded, as if he understood exactly what she meant. He said loneliness was strange that way. It could exist even in a room full of people, even in a life full of accomplishments. Rachel felt something crack open inside her chest. She had spent so many years convincing herself that she didn't need anyone, that independence was the same as strength. But sitting across from Carlos, she realized she had been lying to herself. She was lonely. She had been lonely for a long time. Sophia returned, breathless and grinning, and climbed back into her chair. She announced that there was a giant fish tank in the hallway, and that she had counted 17 fish, but one of them was hiding, so there might be 18. Carlos smiled and asked if she had washed her hands. Sophia held them up as proof. The moment passed, easy and warm, and Rachel felt herself relax in a way she hadn't in years. Sophia asked Rachel if she had ever made a wish on a shooting star. Rachel said she hadn't seen one in a long time. Sophia said that was sad, because wishes were important. You had to make them, even if you didn't think they would come true, because sometimes the universe was listening. Rachel asked what Sophia would wish for. Sophia thought about it seriously, tilting her head to one side. She said she would wish for her dad to be happy. Not just okay, but really happy, the way people were in movies. Carlos looked at his daughter with an expression Rachel couldn't quite name. Love, yes, but also something deeper. Gratitude, maybe. Or wonder. He told Sophia he was already happy, because he had her. Sophia frowned and said that wasn't the same. She wanted him to have someone to laugh with when she was at school, someone to watch movies with after she went to bed, someone who made him smile the way he made her smile. Rachel felt like she was intruding on something private. She looked down at her plate, but she could feel the weight of the moment settling over the table. Carlos cleared his throat and said that he was doing fine. that Sophia didn't need to worry about him. But Sophia just shrugged, unconvinced, and went back to eating her fries. The conversation moved on. But Rachel couldn't shake the feeling that she had just witnessed something achingly honest. Dessert arrived without anyone ordering it. The waiter explained that the restaurant offered complimentary chocolate cake to every table on New Year's Eve. Sophia's eyes went wide. Carlos thanked the waiter and cut the cake into 3 pieces, sliding one toward Rachel without asking if she wanted it. She accepted it, and they ate in companionable silence, the kind that didn't need to be filled. Sophia asked Rachel if she believed in New Year's resolutions. Rachel said she used to, but she had stopped making them because she never kept them. Sophia asked why not. Rachel thought about it. She said she supposed she had always made resolutions about work, about hitting revenue targets, or launching products, or expanding into new markets. But those didn't feel like real resolutions. They were just goals dressed up as promises. Sophia asked what a real resolution would be. Rachel didn't have an answer. She had spent so long measuring her life in metrics and milestones that she didn't know what else to measure it by. Carlos said quietly that maybe a real resolution was about becoming someone, not achieving something, about being kinder or braver or more present. Rachel looked at him, and he looked back, and she realized he wasn't talking to Sophia anymore. He was talking to her. The restaurant had grown louder. Families were finishing their meals, gathering coats, preparing for the countdown. Sophia bounced in her seat, asking how much longer until midnight. Carlos checked his watch and said about 40 minutes. Sophia groaned dramatically and said that was forever. Carlos laughed, and the sound was warm and unguarded, and Rachel realized she hadn't heard him laugh before. It changed his whole face, made him look younger, less tired. Rachel excused herself to use the restroom. She walked through the restaurant, past tables full of people who belonged to each other, and locked herself in a stall. She stood there for a moment, breathing, trying to process what she was feeling. She hadn't expected tonight to matter. She had come to the restaurant out of desperation, out of a refusal to sit alone in her apartment one more year. But now, sitting with Carlos and Sophia, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. She felt seen. Not as Rachel Carter, CEO, not as the woman on the cover of Fortune, just as a person, flawed and lonely and trying. She washed her hands and looked at herself in the mirror. Her makeup was still perfect, her hair still smooth, but her eyes looked different. Softer, maybe, or sadder. She wasn't sure. She dried her hands and walked back to the table, and when she sat down, Sophia smiled at her like she had been missed. Carlos poured more water into Rachel's glass without asking. It was a small gesture, but it felt significant, like he had decided she belonged there, like she wasn't just a stranger they had invited out of pity. Rachel thanked him, and he nodded, and the silence between them felt comfortable now. Familiar, almost. Sophia started drawing on her napkin with a crayon the waiter had brought earlier. She drew a house with a triangle roof and a sun with too many rays. She drew 3 stick figures holding hands. She pointed to the tallest one and said that was her dad. The medium one was herself. The smallest one, she said, was Rachel. Rachel stared at the drawing, at the 3 figures connected by carefully drawn lines, and felt something twist in her chest. She asked Sophia why she had made her so small. Sophia said it was because Rachel seemed sad, and sad people took up less space. Rachel didn't know what to say to that. Carlos looked at the drawing, then at Rachel, and something unspoken passed between them. An acknowledgement that his daughter saw things adults tried to hide. The countdown was beginning. Voices rose across the restaurant, people gathering near the windows to watch the fireworks. Sophia grabbed her father's hand and tugged him toward the glass. Carlos stood, then looked back at Rachel. He didn't say anything. He just waited. Rachel rose slowly and followed them to the window. Sophia positioned herself between them, holding both their hands, and Rachel felt the small, warm grip and realized she couldn't remember the last time she had held someone's hand. The crowd began counting down. 10, 9, 8. Rachel looked at the people around her, couples kissing, families cheering, strangers embracing. 7, 6, 5. She looked at Carlos, and he was looking at Sophia, and Sophia was looking at the sky, waiting for the fireworks. 4, 3, 2. Rachel felt the moment expanding, stretching, becoming something she would carry with her long after tonight ended. 1. The room erupted, cheers and shouts and the sound of champagne corks popping. Outside, fireworks exploded in gold and silver, lighting up the Manhattan skyline. Sophia squealed and jumped, still holding their hands, and Rachel found herself smiling. Really smiling. Not the smile she wore in meetings or interviews. A real smile, unguarded and true. Sophia turned and hugged her father first, fierce and tight, and Carlos bent down and wrapped his arms around her. Then Sophia turned to Rachel, and before Rachel could react, the girl threw her arms around her waist. Rachel stood frozen for a second, unsure what to do. Then, slowly, she put her hands on Sophia's back and hugged her in return. The girl smelled like cake and strawberry shampoo, and Rachel felt something inside her break open. Not painfully, gently, like something that had been locked too long finally coming loose. Sophia pulled back and grinned up at her. She said, "Happy New Year," and Rachel said it back, her voice thick. Carlos extended his hand, and Rachel shook it. His grip was firm and warm, and he held on just a second longer than necessary. He said it was good to meet her, and Rachel realized he meant it. Not good to network with her, not good to get something from her, just good to meet her as a person on a night when both of them needed not to be alone. The moment ended. Families began gathering their things. The restaurant was clearing out, and reality was creeping back in. Rachel knew she should leave. She should thank them and walk out and go back to her life. But she didn't want to. She wanted to stay in this small pocket of warmth, this brief window where she wasn't a CEO or a billionaire or someone people wanted things from. She was just Rachel, and that was enough. Carlos helped Sophia into her coat. The girl was yawning now, her energy finally fading. Rachel put on her own coat, fumbling slightly with the buttons. She thanked Carlos for letting her join them. He said it was Sophia's idea, and Sophia, half asleep against her father's side, mumbled that Rachel had looked lonely. Carlos didn't correct her. He just looked at Rachel with quiet understanding, and Rachel nodded, because it was true. They walked toward the exit together. Rachel didn't know what to say. She didn't know how to end this. So she just walked beside them, through the restaurant, past the empty tables, and the waiters clearing plates, and out into the cold New York night. The air hit her like a shock, sharp and clean, and she pulled her coat tighter. Carlos said goodnight. Sophia waved sleepily, and Rachel stood on the sidewalk and watched them walk away, a father and daughter disappearing into the crowd of people celebrating the new year. She stood there long after they were gone, surrounded by strangers, and realized she wasn't empty anymore. She didn't know what she was, but she wasn't empty. Rachel stood on the sidewalk long after Carlos and Sophia disappeared into the crowd. People streamed past her, laughing and shouting, arms linked, voices bright with celebration. She had never felt more alone in a crowd, but the loneliness felt different now. It wasn't the hollow kind she had carried for years, the kind that made her feel like she was observing life from behind glass. This was something sharper, more immediate, the loneliness of knowing what warmth felt like and having to walk away from it. She pulled out her phone to call a car, then stopped. Her apartment was only 12 blocks away. She could walk. The cold would clear her head. She needed to think. She needed to understand what had just happened and why it mattered so much. Rachel put her phone back in her pocket and started walking, her heels clicking against the pavement in rhythm with the distant sound of fireworks still exploding overhead. The streets were chaos. Confetti drifted through the air like snow. Groups of people spilled out of bars and restaurants, singing and dancing and taking photos. Rachel moved through it all like a ghost, invisible in her expensive coat, untouched by the joy around her. She thought about Sophia's drawing, 3 stick figures holding hands. The smallest one was her because sad people took up less space. A 7-year-old had seen what Rachel had spent decades trying to hide. She reached her building and nodded to the doorman, who wished her a Happy New Year with professional warmth. She stepped into the elevator and watched the numbers climb. 41 floors. She had bought the penthouse 5 years ago, right after her company went public. It had felt like a victory then, a monument to everything she had built. Tonight, it felt like a cage. The elevator doors opened directly into her apartment. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city, and the view was spectacular. Lights stretched out in every direction, glittering and endless. Rachel walked to the window and pressed her hand against the glass. Cold seeped through, numbing her palm. Below, the city celebrated. Above, the sky was dark, except for the occasional burst of color from lingering fireworks. Rachel stood between them, suspended in expensive silence. She thought about pouring herself scotch. She thought about turning on music or calling someone or checking her emails. But she didn't move. She just stood at the window and let herself feel everything she had been avoiding. The ache of sitting at that table. The weight of Sophia's hug. The way Carlos had looked at her when he said a real resolution was about becoming someone, not achieving something. Rachel had spent her entire adult life achieving. She had climbed every ladder, broken every ceiling, built something that would outlast her. But who had she become? She thought about her brother in Seattle. They spoke maybe twice a year, always brief, always polite. He had invited her to Thanksgiving, and she had declined because of a board meeting. He had stopped inviting her after that. She thought about her college roommate, who used to call every few months until Rachel stopped returning the calls. She thought about the assistant who had worked for her for 6 years and knew her coffee order, but not her favorite color. Rachel had built walls so high that no one could climb them, and now she was trapped inside. The city blurred. Rachel realized she was crying. She couldn't remember the last time she had cried. Maybe at her mother's funeral 8 years ago. Maybe not even then. She had been too busy managing the logistics, making sure everything was handled, staying in control. Control had been her religion, her safety. But it hadn't kept her safe. It had just kept her alone. Rachel wiped her eyes and walked to the kitchen. She poured herself water and drank it standing at the counter. The apartment was silent except for the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of the city below. She thought about what Sophia had said, that you had to make wishes even if you didn't think they would come true, because sometimes the universe was listening. Rachel didn't believe in wishes. She believed in strategy and execution and measurable outcomes. But standing in her empty kitchen on the first day of a new year, she found herself wishing anyway. She wished she had asked Carlos for his number. She wished she had said something more than thank you. She wished she could go back to that table and stay there, just a little longer, in the warmth of people who had nothing to gain from her. But wishes didn't work that way. The moment was over. Carlos and Sophia were home by now, probably getting ready for bed, and Rachel was here, alone in her palace of glass and steel. She thought about Monday. The office would be quiet, most people still on vacation, but she would be there. She always was. Her calendar was already full for January. Meetings and calls and decisions that would shape the next quarter. She could see the year stretching ahead of her, month after month of the same disciplined routine. Wake at 5, work until 8, sleep, and repeat. It had always been enough before. Now it felt like a life sentence. Rachel walked back to the window. The fireworks had stopped. The crowds were thinning. The city was beginning to settle into the quiet hours between celebration and mourning. She pressed her forehead against the glass and closed her eyes. She thought about Carlos saying that loneliness could exist even in a room full of people. Even in a life full of accomplishments. He had understood. He had lived it. But he had also found a way through it because he had Sophia. He had someone to get up for. Someone who needed him. Rachel had built a company that employed 3,000 people, but none of them needed her. Not really. They needed the CEO. They needed the strategy and the vision and the capital. But they didn't need Rachel. She opened her eyes and looked at her reflection in the glass. She looked tired. Older than her 42 years. The woman staring back at her had everything she had ever worked for, and nothing she actually wanted. Rachel thought about what a real resolution would be. Not a revenue target. Not an expansion plan. Something that meant she wouldn't spend next New Year's Eve standing alone at this window. She thought about being kinder. She thought about being braver. She thought about being present, the way Carlos had said. What did that even mean? She worked 80-hour weeks. She answered emails at midnight. She attended every meeting, reviewed every report, made every decision. How much more present could she be? But she knew that wasn't what he meant. He meant being present in her own life, not as a CEO, as a person. Rachel thought about calling her brother, not to check in or make polite conversation, but to actually talk, to ask how he was, to tell him she was sorry for missing Thanksgiving, to admit she was lonely. The thought terrified her. Vulnerability had never been part of her vocabulary. She had built her career on being unshakable. Admitting weakness felt like failure. But maybe that was the problem. Maybe strength wasn't about never needing anyone. Maybe it was about having the courage to admit that you did. She picked up her phone. It was almost 2 in the morning, too late to call anyone. But she opened her messages and found her brother's name. She started typing, then stopped, then started again. She wrote that she was thinking about him, that she hoped he had a good new year, that she would like to visit sometime if he was open to it. She read the message 3 times, her finger hovering over the send button. It felt small and inadequate, but it was something. She pressed send before she could change her mind. The message went through, and Rachel set the phone down. She didn't expect a response tonight, maybe not even tomorrow. But she had done something she never did. She had reached out. She had admitted in the smallest possible way that she wanted connection. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Rachel walked to her bedroom and changed out of her dress. She hung it carefully in the closet, next to dozens of other expensive dresses she wore to events she didn't care about. She put on an old t-shirt and crawled into bed. The sheets were cold, the room was dark, but Rachel didn't feel hollow anymore. She felt something else, something uncomfortable and uncertain and almost like hope. She thought about Sophia's stick figure drawing, 3 people holding hands. She thought about the way Carlos had smiled when his daughter laughed. She thought about the hug Sophia had given her, small arms wrapped tight around her waist, trusting and unafraid. Rachel had spent so long believing she didn't need those things. That connection was a distraction. That love was a liability. But tonight, she had been given a glimpse of something different. A life where people invited you to their table, not because of what you could do for them, but because they saw you standing alone and thought you deserved better. Rachel closed her eyes. She didn't know if she would ever see Carlos and Sophia again. She didn't know if she could actually change, or if she would fall back into the same patterns that had kept her safe and lonely for so long. But she knew one thing. She didn't want to spend another year like this. She didn't want to build empires if it meant living in them alone. Money could buy almost anything, but it couldn't buy a seat at someone's table. It couldn't buy the warmth of a child's hug or the quiet understanding in a stranger's eyes. It couldn't buy belonging. And for the first time in her life, Rachel Carter understood that belonging was the only thing that mattered. Everything else was just noise. She fell asleep thinking about stick figures holding hands, and when she woke on the first morning of the new year, she didn't reach for her phone. She walked to the window and looked out at the city, still sleeping, still recovering from the night before. She thought about resolutions, about becoming someone instead of achieving something, and she made herself a promise, not to be perfect, not to have all the answers, just to try, to reach out, to let people in, to take up space not because she was powerful, but because she was human, and that was enough. The sun rose slowly over Manhattan, cold and bright, and Rachel stood at the window and watched it climb. A new year, a new start, not because the calendar said so, but because she had finally decided she deserved one.
This story is a quiet, powerful reminder that success means nothing without human connection, and that the smallest act of kindness can change a life. If this moment touched you, please like the video to support story with heart and meaning. Subscribe to the channel for more unforgettable story about loneliness, hope, and second chances.